good to see everyone here. Is there any announcements or introductions that we can make today? All right, well, seeing none, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Michael Berry. He's a researcher at the Texas A&M Breeding Program, and we're going to do an overview of the program today. Thanks.
I'm going to give you just a brief 45-minute overview of our program. What I'm hoping to do here is just highlight some of our accomplishments. As you guys see what we go through and the changes that we've had to adapt to over the years, the last 15 years or so with our project, and how even though it takes 10 years or so to develop a variety, the program can change overnight, just depending on what's going on with Mother Nature or with politics or what have you. I put this picture up to show you. I've been doing it 27 years. I'm pretty sure I've seen everything, but I haven't. We were planting last year out in West Texas, not a tree around. I needed about one more round to finish planting 600 plots so we could move on to the next place. And evidently this colony of bees was moving through the area, and the queen got tired, and she landed on the underside of that while we were moving, while we were planting. And 2 A&M people left the scene quickly. They were swarmed all over us, and they actually cost me a day and a half. They stayed there through into the next day. We went so far as to start up. The grower had a big air compressor on the strut. We pulled up, taped up the windows, and stuck the hose. We would blow them off of the thing, and they'd come right back. And so we just had to leave, wait till they left before we could finish planting. So just goes to show you, you can still see new things. There's 3 of us that work in this project, 3 PIs. Dr. Simpson's been here the longest. He works up at Seatonville. He actually retired about 9 or 10 years ago, but he still works full time because this is what he likes to do. He's got 49 years of experience. He's made over 25 expeditions down in South America on collections down into the jungle. And I can't tell you for sure how many wild species he's collected, but it's been several hundred. And he takes care of the largest wild species collection in the U.S. Matter of fact, the U.S. collection will call him up when they lose lions and ask for his help. He's released several varieties, and I'll talk about some of those varieties releases shortly, but essentially his last variety release was probably in 2013. What he's focused on now is making crosses between the wild species and get them to a point where myself and my other colleagues can try and use them in our regular variety development program. This is just an example of one of his greenhouses. Each one of those pots is a different line. Some of these can be regrown by seed. Some have to be vegetatively propagated. And he's got about 4 or 5 greenhouses like this that they keep constantly going. Dr. Burrow is another integral part of this project. He's been with us for about 15 years. He's actually up at Lubbock Experiment Station, so he's in a much different climate than I am down here. He's a molecular group. So if you guys came in here and wanted to hear a molecular talk, you're not going to get it. He does all our molecular work. He developed several hundred markers. I'll discuss that further in a little bit. But most of his impact has been on developing early maturing runners for the West Texas region. And in recent years, he started working a lot on drought tolerance too. And I'll get to that shortly. I've been here at this program for 27 years. I worked under Dr. Owen Smith for 9 years before his passing, and I took over. I'm a traditional plant breeder, and the majority of my career has been focused on disease and pest resistance, specifically tomato spotted wilt virus and sclerotinia resistance. But in recent years, we've been pyramiding a lot of the traits that we've developed, and I'll get into those here shortly. Since 2000, we've released 12 new cultivars, and we had a co-release with USDA up in Oklahoma. You've heard me talk about wild species, just a little bit of the genetics behind it. The wild species, there are several thousand sections, but for the most part, they have 2 sets of 10 chromosomes, total 20. When you look at the pomegranate peanut, which is what we eat, what you get, peanut butter, candy, what have you, those are tetraploids. So you got 4 sets of 10 chromosomes, total of 40, and they have arisen from the combination of the A genome and the B genome of the wild species. In theory, something happened in nature, they cross, somehow they double the chromosome numbers, nobody really knows how, but because it's very difficult to do, to make a man-made cross like that. And I will show you shortly what it looks like. When I say cultivated, this is typically what you're talking about, very uniform looking field. These are hundreds of runner-sized plots. But when I talk about wild species and where he went to get them, this is a slash and burn field from South America. Just one of the places he went to visit. They would go in and chop down the native vegetation, burn it off, and then plant peanuts. What you can't see in this film very good, there's actually peanuts that were dug up and popped down here, and he found those on one of his trips. But this is just two exceptional wild species. I wouldn't even know this was a peanut except for that little yellow flower there. It looks more like an oleander plant to me. This is another one. This is Arachis rectoides. It's a very erect growth habit. There's very few leaves on it compared to cultivated species, but this is just to give you an idea of the differences that we see. Also, with the cultivated peanut, when the flower is pollinated, it will actually thin from that axial bud. It will thin down a peg into the ground and produce a peanut once it hits the ground about an inch under the surface. With your wild species, they may place a peg this deep, so you can't dig them conventionally. You got to physically go out there with the shovel, dig it up, screen it, because the seeds may also be this big. And so there are a lot of reasons it's very difficult to work with wild species peanuts. This little culprit is Tic-Tac-6. Dr. Simpson developed this back in the 70s. He crossed two Asian elk peanuts, and then he took the fertile hybrids from that and crossed it with the genome and doubled the chromosome number. From this plant, we have gotten higher oil content, we've gotten root knot nematode resistance, and we've gotten leaf spot resistance. Those are just the three that I know of that we've gotten genes from. So here again, this is a difficult, we can cross with it, but it takes a long time and a lot of back crossing to get to what you want. I had a graduate student here several years ago when we worked with the Chevron biofuel project. That plant I just showed you has seeds with a little bitty like that, but they will be up to 60% total oil content, whereas regular peanuts are 45 to 49%. So we wanted to make crosses to try and develop some higher oil content lines. He took one of our Spanish types and crossed it with the plant I just showed you, and he was able to get 6 fertile hybrids off of that. And he asked me how to plant them out in the field. Typically, I plant my F1s about 2 to 3 feet apart. There's plenty of room for individual harvest. I told him he should space them out about 5 feet because I didn't know what was going to come from these wild species or I crosses. Those are actually 5 foot apart. Those stakes for the 6 plants. What's hard to tell here is they spread out over 5 to 6 rows. Each one of those plants is 15 to 18 feet in diameter, which would be horrible to harvest. You see there are hundreds of yellow flowers on each one of them. They probably produce several thousand flowers, and we were able to find 6 seeds under this plant. So therein lies the problem with dealing with crossing with wild species for peanuts. Okay, within the peanut, we have 4 market types that we use in the U.S. There's runner types that take up about 80% of the acreage, the total acreage for the U.S. Virginia types is 15%, Spanish is 4%, and Valencia is less than 1%. Valencias are really a niche market. Forever they were just grown solely in New Mexico, whereas the Virginia types were grown specifically in Virginia, South Carolina region. If we were to look at just Texas, prior to 2000 or so, our makeup was about 85% runners and 15% Spanish. That's why we hadn't released until recently any Virginias or Valencia types, because we just didn't grow them. When they did away with the old allotment program, acreages shift, and they changed the way they handle. There's no government support price on peanuts anymore, so it's a world market value. So that really changed the way our market was driven here in this state, because they're going to grow whatever pays the most. So now all of a sudden, on any given year, depending on any given price, like 2 years ago, I would say our acreage is maybe 45% runners, 20 to 25% Virginias and Spanish, and then about 8 to 10% or so for Valencia. So it really depends on what the market bears right now for us. When I talk about runner types, this is typically what you're seeing. This is a runner type, which means the lateral branches on it run along the ground. They're not raised up off the ground. They'll put pegs out all the way along that branch. When you look at a Spanish type, it's a more erect growth habit. In other words, your lateral branches, they basically come off the main stem and go up at a 45-degree angle. I didn't put pictures of Valencia and Brazilian type because you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between them and the Spanish. They look very similar. They're a more upright growth habit. Only the runners stay on the ground all the way. When we talk about seed characteristics, this is where the main difference is for the full market type. The Virginia types, which are on the upper right-hand corner here, those are your largest seed types. Those are typically the ones that you see when you go buy peanuts at a ballpark or something. They're sold in shell almost completely. They don't hardly sell any of these for anything else. They're the largest seed, as I said. They weigh in at about 1 gram per seed. We do 100 seed weights on everything. They're typically 100 to 110 grams per 100 seed. When you look at our runner types, they're a more medium-sized seed. They run 60 to 70 grams per seed. The majority of this runner type is used for making peanut butter. You'll use them for everything, but that's where the majority of your peanut butter is coming from, unless you start buying organics and stuff like that. Then it is Spanish. But, the Spanish peanuts are the smallest of the group. They range in the 40 to 45 grams per 100 seed weight, and they've been typically used for candy most of the time. They will sell them in shell kernels for use to eat in the bag and stuff, but typically they are used for candy consumption. And then you have the Valencia, which I said before, beach market, they're sold in shell too at like games and stuff. The biggest difference for them is most of these others range in the 1 to 2 feet per pound. These will go anywhere from 1 to 6 feet per pound, and they will have a dark red color to their seed casket. Now, as far as the way we run our program for variety development, we pretty much follow the pedigree selection format all the time. We use a lot of back crossing, especially now because we're pyramiding a bunch of different traits together. So once you get an elite line that has, let's say, 3 or 4 traits that we wanted, and we want one other trait in there for another line, we'll do a lot of back crossing. I have used single seed descent, but only on rare occasions, and usually it's when we've had a disaster. Back in '96, with a really, really hot summer, and a lot of seed aborted on our plants, and so we had 2 space plants. We went and did a single seed descent because they just didn't produce enough seed. Same thing happened in 2011 when we had the bad drought. I had my space plants down in Yoakum on a nursery where we watered. They looked beautiful, but they were the only thing that looked green and beautiful for several counties. So every deer, every raccoon, every animal came to eat there. And so when we dug them, they literally had 1 or 2 pods per plant where there should have been 150 to 200 pods per plant. So we did a single seed descent there and carried that material forward. This I say loosely is our typical from crossing to release. I say loosely because there can be 100 variations off of it. Typically, right about now, I'm making my spring crosses, develop up one. We'll harvest them in May, plant them back in June in the field, harvest them in the fall, and I'll go to my F2 space plant in the second year. We'll make selections on those, come back to plant rows for evaluation, which depending on what we're working on. If I'm working on spotted wilt, I'll put those plant rows in spotted wilt nursery, Sclerotinia, and be a Sclerotinia nursery.
So in your F2, how many plants you have that population?
Okay. You could have 10 different people get 10 different answers how to do this. I will tell you how I do it.
Yeah.
We're limited by space, land availability, money, time, people. So it's not hard for me. I've got my crossing project down to where I get 90% success rate. I mean, if it's good, in a week I can produce a couple hundred F1s. Each one of those is going to average about 100 feet. Average, I'd say, on normal. So I mean, you do 200 times 100, that's 20,000 F2s right there. That's about all the land I have space for. Because that'll cover, if I planted, putting that 2 feet apart, that'll cover 3 acres. And that's about all the time I want to spend 10 over. Because we go through each plant, we turn them over with the digger, but I actually go through and we look at every plant in there individually. So for me, it depends on the year, but anywhere from 10 to 20,000 F2 is what I put out. Now, having said that, a lot of people like to use a certain percentage of selection pressure. And for me, I already know I'm going to have room for about 500 plant rooms, period. So that's an extreme amount of pressure selection on that. But we'll go through and I will typically, if I know I'm at 500 plant rows, I'll make 650 plant selections, because when we shell them out, we're also going to be looking at seed testes, pods, and stuff like that, and there'll be some more that get kicked out. Or everything has to be high oleic. If we made a cross where it's a high oleic by non-high oleic, we're going to lose 75% of those because they're not going to be homozygous for the high oleic trait. So that's how I operate. I figured somebody was going to ask you that. I'm sure every breeder in here would tell you something different. I know, like Dr. Smith, has a lot more acres of plot than I do. I do about 40 yield tests a year, and that's as much as we can handle. By the time we get them all graded and yield tests and everything, we're usually finishing up one day and starting to shell for planting the next day. So,
how many breeding processes do you have? Just 1,000 plants. How many different crosses?
It depends. I mean, average, I'll usually work, like this year we're talking about, we're crossing our most disease resistant lines with some of Mark's drought stuff. That'd be 1 center crosses, and we may use 4 or 5 different plants there. Then we'll work on early maturity, crossing with the MBR lines, so there may be 4 or 5 steps there. I would say we probably on average be looking at maybe 10 to 15 different sets, actual sets of crosses. So we try to get 200 plus F1s off of. It just depends on, like when we brought in Chevron, all of a sudden, we like doubled everything because we still working on the stuff we can't produce for and start making crosses for Chevron. Yep.
What do you do with crosses?
Very time consuming. The blooms, the buds are about 1/4 inch long by 1/8 inch wide, and the peanut flower is like a perfect flower. It's completely closed up, so it doesn't like to be opened up. But what I found early on, when I first started here, we would have about a 35%, 40% success rate. And it's because of the humidity, basically. So I built a PVC frame over our crossing block and put plastic over it. And we put humidity misters under it, so we got the humidity up to about 95% in there. And that helped immensely. But you basically peel that flower open, and there are 8 anthers in there that you take 4 steps, which you can pull off. They're about, well, let's put this way, the style that's left is about the size of an eyelash. You peel the anthers off carefully, and you close it all the way back up the same way you took it apart. And leave it there overnight. The next morning, it'll open up naturally with the sunlight, and you go take the pollen. Usually we pollinate from about 7 o'clock in the morning to 8:30. Because I want to be finished and let it sit there a while like that without humidity. Because by 10, the sun's coming up, it's starting to get hotter, and I can't see everything covered because it'll get too hot. But the best scenario for me is when we've had several days of sunlight, because they're going to put a ton of blooms on, and I know it's going to rain the next day, because then it stays cloudy all day, and we'll get a lot of times we'll get 95 to 100% on our crossing, which that's the key to everything else. I would say, in a good night, if I'm there 3 hours, I can do 75 flowers by myself. I mean, it's a slow process, which is getting slower because my eyes are going. So now I have to wear glasses to be able to see all this and do all this. But in your hands, I used to play a lot of softball. I mean, it's kind of softball, and I couldn't do that before going to golf because you just shake too much. I mean, you got to have steady hands and good eyes. This is pretty much the way we follow through. Of course, we go through breeder seed, foundation, registered, and certified seed. We handle the breeder seed, and we've actually had an extra step. I had to do that secretly because now everything has to be high oleic. Now a lot of my material nematode resistant, and we got markers for that. So before we release it, we want to make sure that every seed, used to you got a variety of normal oleic. You found one you like, you just shell out the plot and drew the seed for that variety. Now, we'll take 300 or 400 seeds out of one of those plots. We'll cut a piece off, we'll check it for the oleic, make sure it's high oleic. We'll check it for the DNA to make sure it's got the markers for nematode resistance. Then we'll plant those 400 seeds and increase it from there. So actually it adds an extra year to us doing our seed increases on that. As far as the testing procedures, about 5 years ago, I started taking over the yield testing for the state. So Mark may yield test some lines early generation, but once he gets them farther along, he hands them off to me. So I'm testing everything. We do all randomized complete block form. All of our tests are 3 to 4 reps. Most of them are 12 foot in length. I have on occasion planted combine plots that are anywhere from 40 feet up to 500 feet, depending on what we're trying to do at the time. But for the most part, I think 90% of our plots are about 12 foot in length, 2-row plots. During the first year of yield testing, we usually try to do one location here, or South Texas, and one location in West Texas to see how they're going to do. If they make it past that, then they go into multi-location. So the next 2 years, they're in as many places as I can put them to get as much information as I can. The advanced line trials, what we call advanced line trials, they're in 7+ locations every year if we can get them there. And all these plots get weighed and graded. Now, when I say graded, everybody's going, graded it. When you go buy a bag of peanuts that aren't shelled, and you start to pop them open and eat them, sometimes there's empty ones because the seed board, sometimes there's rotten ones. So you can imagine these buying points that are buying the peanuts from the grower, they got to know what they're buying because all they're seeing is the pod in the truckload. So they come in and pull a 500-gram sample out of every 18 liter that comes in there. They shell it, so they know the starting weight was 500 grams. They shell it out, and essentially it goes through a lot of different screens, but essentially what they're trying to do is find out the weight of the good edible peanuts in there. They divide that by the original weight and give them a percentage. So if I tell you your truckload grade is 78, that means 78% of that truck is good edible peanuts. And a grade of 78 is a good grade. You start getting below 74, they start docking, you get into the 60s, they're going to go what they call tank 2, and you're not going to get very much money for this peanut because they're poor. A grade of 80 is excellent. Some of the traits that we've been worried about over the years that we've had to work with were spotted wilt back in the mid-'80s. That was a big deal for us. It was wiping out fields. Before that, my boss, prior to me, had been working on pod rot resistance. But when that booger hit, I think over a 3-year period in South Texas alone, 3 counties lost $15 million because it would completely wipe out the field. We had no resistance. Same thing occurred later. So essentially, the program went from working on pod rot resistance to spotted wilt resistance. About 3 years later, Sclerotinia broke out in Central Texas, which is where we had about 190,000 acres of peanuts. And that was a real booger because once you get in the field, it won't leave. And they were having 0 yields there too. So again, we shifted to another project and worked on it. We've always worked on leaf spot resistance. The high leg trait came about in the early 90s, and by 2000, manufacturers wanted everything high leg. In Texas, I mean, to be specific there. They're still growing low legs over in the southeast, but in Texas, they wanted it completely high leg. Dr. Simpson developed the root knot nematode resistance, which I'll talk about shortly. And the high grade potential, like I just explained to you, 78 to 80. Mark's been working on early maturity from 2000 when he got here, and that's basically because our acreage shifted from Central Texas to West Texas. And in that environment, it's a higher elevation, they have a lot shorter growing. They actually grow them out longer, but their heat units are a lot less out there. They have cooler nighttime temperatures, so it's making, in other words, 140-day peanut in South Texas from planting to harvest becomes 170-day peanut out there. And it still may not be mature when it gets harvested, which can cause all flavors. So we've been working for 15 years on developing early maturing run peanuts. The high all content I mentioned came about in 2008, and then since the drought of 2011, we've been working on drought tolerance. I thought I'd highlight some of the accomplishments, and for us, the best way to do that is by looking at our variety releases. I like this picture, which I've shown before, but this is one of our spotted wilt nursery down in South Texas back in the 90s. Pre-drone for you young people. This was actually a camera given to a crop duster who flew over a Hope people had good ways. What you're looking at here is, you see how these pair rows are brown and those are, and those. We went in that nursery to plant spreader rows of the susceptible variety. It was actually Cameron 88, highly susceptible to spotted wilt. And we made sure all our plots are 2-row plots, so each plot was bordered on one side by that susceptible variety to try and bring in the pressure. What you should notice is our most advanced line test is down here. You see those plots are still dark green and look good. As you move forward, Some of these are earlier generation lines we looked at. There's a lot more that are dying there because they haven't been screened as long. And up here, that's our SC3 plant row. There's a whole lot of those where entire families were susceptible, so they got knocked out. And you'll notice that by the ranges that are just completely dead and brown. This block here ended up, that was a seed increase of what ended up being called variety release Cameron 002. And I'll discuss that in a second. The first one I'll talk about is Cohen and Neotim. These were both released by Dr. Simpson of Teamville. He developed nematode resistance many years ago, but getting it transferred into something that could be commercially available took quite some time. His first release was Cohen, which is pictured here on the left. It was released in 2001. It yielded a little less than the other commercial varieties when they weren't under nematode infestation, so it didn't take off as much as he'd like it to. But I will tell you this picture made the cover crop science, and I think that's the only peanut, to my knowledge, that's made the cover crop science. This was Cameron 96. It had good spotted wilt resistance, but as you can tell, it didn't have good nematode resistance. For those of you who don't know, this is what nematodes will do to peanuts. They'll put galls on the peanut pods themselves. They'll cause more disease. They'll also put galling on the roots, and eventually they'll kill it. In 2002, I released Nolan. It was named after my predecessor, Dr. Owen Smith. He had done a lot of work on trying to transfer Ohio egg traits into the Spanish material. He passed away about 4 years before we were able to release this variety. This was the first pilot Spanish type variety ever commercially available. It's still being grown today, to my surprise, because usually varieties aren't lasting that long. There's so many coming out year after year that they don't usually stick around that long. And I actually had one of the seed companies ask me to redo breeder seed on it this last week. So it has been around quite some time. I released Cameron 001 and 002 in consecutive years, 2002 and 2003. The reason being, I picked 01 to release because it always yielded better than the others. Once it got out there, they liked it, but it had a little large kernel on it. So they wanted something with a little bit smaller kernel, a little lower sugar content. So we released the sister line, which is Cameron 002 the next year. There have been high-leg runner varieties out, like Clever Runner 458, which is grown widely, but it didn't have any disease with it. These two both had resistance, moderate level resistance to spotted wilt and Sclerotinia, so they were really the first high-leg varieties with any kind of disease resistance package. This picture is actually a 1 acre block of Cameron 001, and that grower, who's one of the best growers down there, has been averaging about 2,500 to 5,000 pounds per acre, and we yielded 6,300 pounds off that 1 acre. And needless to say, he grew Cameron 001 for many years after we did that increase on the affiliate. Spotted wilt, for those of you who don't know, they call it the symptoms like this, they call it a green island effect. They'll actually make little green island looking spots on the leaflet. This was the line, just 224, that we transferred our resistance to spotted wilt from. And as you can tell, this is one of the susceptible lines. It's completely dead at the time of harvest. When you hear me talk about Sclerotinia blight, it's a full-board fungus. It causes little mycelium like this. It also causes blasting of the limbs. Wherever they were touching the ground, it comes from the soil and attacks it. And the bad thing about this is, once you get the sclerosis from this disease in your field, it doesn't go away. It's there forever. So we have to be very careful. Our nursery at Stephenville is Sclerotinia infected. It's been that way for 30 years. But we have to be very careful because it can be feed transmitted about taking any of that material and going anywhere with it. So a lot of times, instead of planting F2s for selection directly there, I'll plant my F2s somewhere else, select them, and we'll split the seed from that and go duplicate plots. We'll plant plots there under disease and elsewhere where they're disease free, so we don't take any chance of spreading disease to the growers. Okay, Cameron 06 is a Spanish type that I released in 2006. The reason for this variety's release, we were working feverishly on trying to get early maturing runners for West Texas. As I told you earlier, Spanish types mature about 2 weeks earlier than runners. We know that. But we weren't able to get an early maturing runner as quickly as we wanted. So my thought process was, well, the Spanish are a lot smaller, but I can select for a large seed. So I selected this variety because it had seed size equal to runner type, but it still had the maturity of the Spanish. I thought, well, they can use this in place of a runner until we get an early maturing runner. I talked to the seed companies, they all said, yeah, that'll work. I released it, they grew rid of the Spanish. They never sold it. It took up about 43% of the acreage, but they never sold it as a runner type. They never used it as a runner type. They sold it strictly as Spanish. So, live and learn, but I guess I would tell you from that. But again, also in 2006, this actually came out of our graduate research work. I released Camarilla 07. This is probably the most disease-resistant peanut that we've released as far as having excellent resistance to Tomato spotted wilt virus and Sclerotinia. What you're looking at here is the disease registered spotted wilt virus. We had a spotlight next to it that was completely dead. Of course, it was completely healthy. What I will tell you is, under heavy disease pressure, it out-yielded Camarilla 1 and Camarilla 2 by about 1,000 pounds per acre. When there was no disease pressure, they would probably out-yield it by about 200 pounds per acre. The problem with this variety was, I released it in 2006. This spotted wilt pressure heavy from 85 to 05. We haven't had any spotted wilt since then. And we don't know why, it just disappeared. It has left the country, well, they still have it in Georgia, but for our state, it's been gone. I talked to pest guys and they had not seen it. Oh, they might find one plant here or there, but that's it. And so, that kind of hurts this variety. We are in talks with some of the companies about going in other countries where they have some pressure. And this handsome devil, that's when I have a magnum up there. This is Camarilla 11. I released it in 2011. It has excellent, probably the most resistant thing we have for Sclerotinia, which means it will work good for West Texas because they have some Sclerotinia. It also has excellent grade potential. And when I say excellent grade potential, it's probably the highest grade thing we've ever had. I had seed company call me about 2 months ago. They had a grower growing on one purple out there, and he had 3 loads come in that graded 82, 81, and 81. I grade 2,000 samples a year, and I've been doing it for 27 years. I've seen 181 and maybe 10 to 15 80s. I've never even heard of an 82. So I'm very happy with it, and I hope they're going to start getting more happy with it and grow as many acres as they can. But it has an extremely high grade potential, so we're hoping. This is Dr. Simpson's last release. It was left in 2013. That just goes to show you, he released Nematam in 2003, and it took till now for us to get a high oleic version of the same thing. This is 10 years. We can speed things up by using winter air treats, but it still typically takes close to 10 years by the time everything's said and done. What's been grown for the last few years on several thousand acres in South Texas, especially it appears that we're having more and more acreage down there that has nematode pressure, and so it's been picking up speed. I will tell you, it's got a large growth habit with big stems, and they don't like that when they're thrashing because they end up with more trash in the bin. And so we're hopeful. I've got some stuff coming down the pipeline by next year. We'll be able to replace this with another variety that grades a little better and has a lot better growth habit. This is actually one of our nurseries in South Texas. The grower didn't know we had nematodes on this place, and we didn't either when we went there, but this is at a nursery, and we had 60-foot plots here. The dark green, this is actually web right here. That's one of my other lines I was talking about that might replace it, and that one is too. The rest of the field was yellow because it was starting to die from nematode pressure. But you could pick out every nematode resistant line out there because they were still pretty in dark green. One of the side notes that we saw, you see this little worm damage here? At the end, right before we harvested, they had infestation of fall armyworms that come in. The stuff that wasn't nematode resistant was probably 50 to 60% defoliated. They had said maybe 5% on the nematode resistant line, and it may be a preference issue. That still remains to be seen, but it was obvious. You could walk up the plot that weren't nematode resistant, they ate the the ones that weren't even so did in Arkansas. So it was an interesting sidebar. Now, Dr. Burrow released Schubert in 2013. We're hoping it will take the place of the Olin and Canada 6 variety. It's got about a 500 pound per acre increased yield, and it grades about 1 to 2% higher. Last year was the first year that the seed companies had it. They grew about 50 acres each, so I'm really hoping that we see a few thousand acres of it this next year in production. He also released Handel 14. As you recall, I told you 10 years ago we weren't even touching Valencia over genius because we just didn't grow them here. Well, the acreage has picked up, and as a result, we started crossing with them. This actually came from some crosses that I made like 16 years ago, but I had so much other stuff going on, it got put on the burner, and so he took it over, and he made all the selection and work on it, yield testing, and as a result, he released this variety. This was early on in the seed increase, it got a lot bigger than that, but because there's such a small niche market for it, we actually signed an exclusive license agreement with one of the seed companies to grow this and produce it. So it's the first time we've done that, and we'll see how that turns out in the future. It's still just now in the seed increase stages. As far as future releases go, we're discussing right now our first highlight Virginia type release that we hope to get written up to the plant release committee this year. She's still in charge, right? And by next year, I hope to have a follow-up on the nematode to replace web. I mentioned leaf spot. We've been working on this project forever. We finally, back in the early 90s, had some lines that yielded good, had excellent leaf spot resistance, and then everything went to highlight. So it was like starting all the way back over again. I made a bunch of cross. I can find things that are high yielding, have good leaf spot resistance, but they'll have low grade. Or they'll have good grade, good leaf spot resistance, but low grade. And so we've taken the best 5 that we could take and never crossed them. This past year was the first year we actually yield tested on limited scale. And we're hoping out of this group of material we have something we can release in the future. But this is just an example of a leaf spot resistance versus a variety that did not fare well with the leaf spot. As far as future breeding efforts go, as I told you before, Mark has developed hundreds of markers. I'm not the molecular person, but I can tell you I listen to the talk, and every time I turn around, we switch markers, the different types of markers that we use. So he's in the process of trying to get everything into chip-based markers, because we're going to be able to use a chip shortly. I think they just tested it last week, if I understood it right, where they can try 384 samples at a time. And my hope is that if we have markers for a high oil trait, we've got nematode, leaf spot resistance, a lot of different traits we're measuring for drought tolerance. My hope is we'll be able to screen a lot of early generation material with these chips, so we can kick out a lot of bad stuff or group things. In other words, something high rate, nematode resistant, and leaf spot resistant, we can group that into this group of yield test versus something that's got the drought tolerance. But it should enable us to kick out stuff early on in the project, and more importantly, like when you're testing for drought and you run 25% irrigation on it for half the season and you get 10 inches of rain, that just screwed up your whole drought experiment. So my hopes are some of these things, just like with the spotted wilt, we haven't had any spotted wilt to speak of, we'll be able to screen for some of these traits without actually having them in the field. Most of my efforts will be continue to combine all the traits that we've got. And Mark will still be, it'll probably take another 15 years before we get, I would say, something releasable that's going to be drought tolerant. We've made a lot of movement towards that, but it's going to take a long time to get something to yield and grade as well as everything else and have good drought tolerance. Now, just a few final thoughts, and this is just my observations over the years. This is how fluid things need to be. As I explained earlier, with the spotted wilt, sclerotinia, I mean, things can change overnight. In 2000, they shifted the program, they did away with peanut allotment. Prior to 2000, the bank program did peanut allotment. You had to have an allotment to be able to grow peanuts on your land. If you didn't, you couldn't. So, this is, let me move forward. If you look at it in 1980, this is what our acres looked like. South Texas had 85,000, there was about 193,000 up there in Green and Central Texas, and maybe 10,000 out in West Texas. When they did away with the allotments, that meant people could go plant peanuts wherever they wanted to. And so the acreage shifted. And this is what it looked like 20 years later. And really, this only took about 5 years to happen. I mean, it went from Central Texas to West. Central Texas had been growing peanuts for so long on the same land that disease pressure was horrible. They found out, plus, it was about that time they started putting a lot of timber-foods on West Texas. And it was sandy land. There hadn't been any disease pressure because there hadn't been any peanuts there before. So they could make these huge yields. They didn't have to spray, they didn't have to worry about disease. So all of a sudden, we go from worrying about spotted wilt and 13 in our program to they're worried about high yield and high grade, period. They don't care about all this other stuff, and maybe early maturity. So it really shifted our program focus. And I mean, in just a short period of time. The other thing you can look at is how equipment has changed. This is what they used for 60 years, 2-row equipment. About 30,000 for that thing when it's brand new. Now a lot of them have these. That's 300,000 sitting there. I deal with 2 growers in South Texas that between the 2 of them raise about 5,500 acres of peanuts. They have 10 of those machines. They'll move into a big pivot and finish in 4 hours. Whereas used to growers, they literally, some of the growers had 25 of these machines with 25 John Deere tractors full of them, little tractors. And they would go in there and it would take them 3 times as long to do the same thing. This is the plot thresher that we use a lot. That's one that I built a few years ago. We still use this because that one will break down times and we use different machines for different projects. But that machine's 50 years old and we still use it in our threshing. So, I'll leave you with this. Because that's pretty much, well, I think you're up to date for a breather. Things are going to change. I can tell you that. They're going to change all the time, whether it's political, whether it's Mother Nature, whether it's your stakeholders. I mean, the stakeholders control most of it. They're financing your program. And if they move from Central Texas to West Texas, they don't care about the 13 years, they do care about whatever they care about. And the problem with that is, like I said, it takes 10 years from start to finish to get that variety done. They may change their mind overnight. And so you just have to be able to adapt. And that's an any breeding program. I don't care which one you're in. Yes, sir.
That's a question. Is there any commercial breeding methods?
There was some. There's been several. I'll put it that way. There was one when I first started, and they were around AgriLife. They were around for a while. Then there was another individual who left for the private, the public breeding company. He started his own private one, but he was in partnership with someone else, and they have since had a huge falling out and lawsuits and everything else going on. So there aren't as many as you would think. Because peanuts are a different animal anyway. It's just like I tell somebody else. There's a lot of crops, like you plant wheat, you can stop planting corn tomorrow, your combine still works for it. But peanuts, most of your equipment doesn't work for any other crop. That combine he has will work for anything else. That's a $300,000 peanut combine. He's got about a 45-day window for harvest. Somewhere like that. So when they first developed those, there were some people in West Texas. They're going to do commercial peanut harvesting, just like you see with wheat and all the others. They bought 3 of those at $250,000 to $300,000 a piece. Within 2 years, they were selling them. Because, especially in West Texas, they have about a 30-day window for harvesting, and that's it. And then they're done. So it's a different animal. That's why it's hard when growers get out of peanut growing. It's hard for them to come back into it because they got to buy diggers, they got to buy harvesters. It's just different.
Second question is, with the peanuts, you mentioned you have the salted ball color, and candy peanuts and things like that. What is the percentage for each market in Northern
Well, I couldn't say. We go to our national meetings, we have a sit down with the, they won't tell you probably. We have a sit down with the market people. And, I mean, the breeders will get up there and talk about all our stuff, they'll ask us questions, and they'll get up there and we'll ask them what they want. And part of the problem is every one of them wants something different. I mean, when you talk to the peanut butter people, they want something completely different than the in-shell people or the people like planters that are shelling peanuts out and selling them roasted salted. Or Eminent Mars, for example, they're very picky. They want all medium size out of the runner, so that their peanut ball looks the same when they come on the can. And what I find interesting to me is when I talk to them, you can't believe. If I get a piece of candy that tastes funny or not good, I throw it away. We'll buy another one. They will get hundreds of thousands of letters from people complaining about the taste of something. And they'll tell you. It's not that it tastes bad, it just tastes different. So, and on any given year, for peanuts in general, if your environment's a little bit different, it can have an effect on that. I mean, if we have an early winter in West Texas, they're not mature, they'll get what's called a fruity fermented flavor, and some of these manufacturers will buy them by the trainload, you know. They said they'd have these metal shipping containers come in, and they'll open it up, and it had such a strong flavor, or fruity fermented flavor and smell in it, they basically have to throw it away and steam clean the dadgum shipping container to get rid of the smell. So we find that we try to get them to sit down and tell us, we want this or this. Number one, it's proprietary stuff. They're not going to tell us some of that stuff. But number two, you can't, there's no way we can develop peanuts that will fit all their specific needs. That's why you need a lot of varieties, actually.
Yeah. What I hear about afterthoughts and associations with like peanut butter.
Well, we haven't, now, this may change, but I doubt it. We haven't had to worry about aflatoxins because when they did away with the original Farm Bill back in 2000 or so, or the Flow Peanut Program, I should say, prior to that, we had a lot of dry land peanuts. And dry land peanuts are typically where we get aflatoxins from. We rarely ever see it in our irrigated peanuts. But when they did away with that program, it got rid of all our marginal farmers and anybody that was barely making money off of it, which would be the dry land guys, they just split. So up until last year, I would tell you we're 100% irrigated. Now last year, we probably had 50,000 acres planted for insurance purposes. You go to West Texas, they'd be planted 2 feet apart, which they should be about 3 inches apart. They'd be planted 2 feet apart for insurance purposes, though. A lot of them never intended to harvest them. We got to one field and it was flat. I've never seen, they're about this far apart, about this tall. And I was telling one of the other growers about it. I was like, he looked like he shredded it. He goes, oh, no. Those aren't shredded, they're conditioned. And I said, what? He said, they had tumbleweeds and stuff out there. They went out there with the shredder and conditioned them for harvesting. But from what I understand, all the seed companies, they sold them the seed, the plant, but they all told them they wouldn't be buying them back because they were not irrigated and they don't want to take the risk of getting aflatoxins. Now they still run into it in Georgia quite a bit because while there's a lot of irrigation in Georgia, but a lot of it's surface irrigation, and there's a lot of them that don't irrigate because they get a lot of rain over there. So like this year, I haven't heard, they don't talk a lot too loud about it, but like there was a bad drought this year over there, and I'm sure they're running into some aflatoxin problems. But when I talked to the seed company guys, one of them told me one time, and this is a guy way up, he said, oh, we just plant them, and now get rid of it. And I was like, I don't think so, but I know for a fact they'll buy peanuts from elsewhere, because they're allowed a certain percentage, they'll blend them until they get it down to that percentage, so that they can sell them legally. So.
You probably had mentioned about the best. Which one is the best out of those four?
Everybody, most people think the Spanish type is the best flavor out of the four. I mean, they just have a traditional peanut flavor. Most people like them.
And that is about 4%.
On the total, yeah, you're big, yeah, somewhere. Most of the Spanish peanuts are grown here in West Texas. That's why, for years now, most of our varieties, nobody else is doing a lot of work on Spanish peanuts because it's such a small acreage, and so most of our varieties just say this is
So which one gives the best production out of this one?
they're pretty much making Mexican 10-10-9, 10-06 and the Olin. We actually had one prior to that 10-10-90, which was probably better than both of them still, but it was a low leg, it wasn't a high leg, and like Olin, for instance, came from a first back cross with that. And I think 10-06 was for the third or fourth. We carried it out for like 7 back crosses, and we still can't get it to yield better than the original 10-10-90. And so we're trying to find. Actually, Schubert came, the recent release about the Pro. That was a case where I said I made those crosses 16 years ago. We were trying to transfer high legs into the Valencia type. I crossed some of our Spanish high legs, get that transfer done. And when he made all the selections, Schubert just happened to be a Spanish type that segregated out of the Valencia cross. And so he released it in Spanish and turned out all 14 segregated out of the Valencia type. So we actually got 2 different variety market types out of that one cross.
So what companies are involved in the seed industry of peanuts?
There's 3 now. There was 4. In Texas, well, for the most part, there's a small company down in Pleasanton called Local Peanut Company. Birdsong is a very large company, and Golden Peanut Company. There was a 4th that was in Oklahoma for many years. And a couple of years ago, they tried to branch out into Mississippi and blow up and get a lot bigger than they were. And there's a lot of, all I hear is rumors, but what happened was it was wet and rainy there when they were harvesting, and from what I understand, I think they lost $6 million worth of peanuts because they got put up too wet and they molded, and that $6 million loss broke them, and so they have since gone bankrupt and closed.
Another question is related. How long in your German class, and how long can you hold it? Peanut seed? And how cold you need to be, or how you condition it?
Typically, well, I had stuff in my cooler here that was 30 years old, and it was set at 38, and that was just stuff that was kept in bags. Now, pretty much everything I do, since they invented a vacuum sealer, I vacuum seal everything that I want to store long term. You throw in a freezer. I know Dr. Simpson's got stuff from the 70s that was still germ, but now the germ's gone way down on that stuff, because it wasn't packed that way either. But yeah, it'll last a long time, especially if you freeze. Now I can tell you this, because I had a whole cooler with 30 and 40-year-old material. When the cooler goes out mid-July and they don't fix it for 2 to 3 weeks, you lose everything. Or when they fix it, but they broke the dehumidifier when they fixed it, and you didn't know it, you will lose everything that way too, because everything will get mold on it. And with peanuts, once you get mold, they're done. I would assume any seed, once you get mold on it. So, yeah, that was a big loss.
You say high iron and high weight. What are the values of customers?
The higher leg, on typical peanuts, it's olate, olinolate, is your fatty acid I'm talking about. On regular peanuts, they're non-high leg, it's a 1-to-1 ratio. On our high leg stuff, it's pretty much a 20 or 24-to-1 ratio in there, and it'll improve the shelf. It'll make them last 15 times longer. The shelf life, so they increase it by 15 points.
The high content, the high
The oil content, that's different. So the other was oleic versus mineralic. The oil is total oil content. We were running 45 in our Spanish and maybe 49% total oil content runners. We have some runners now that are upwards of 56, 57% total oil content. That's a lot of species, right? Hybrids. I think some of the seeds on it tested 62%, but there will be seeds, and it just makes a few of them. So getting that transfer. We actually got lucky in that project because Dr. Simpson had made 7 back crosses in materials through the years trying to develop new solar systems. We kept a lot of that project. And once we started testing and found out that line had 62% oil, we went back and started testing all that project that we had in there, and we found 5 lines that had really elevated oil content, and they already were lightly cultivated, and they already yielded pretty good, so we had a big step forward there with that. We got lucky.
Any link with the peanut program, an example?
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Simpson and Dr. Burrows do most of that. Yeah, they've both been involved for many years in that. Yeah.
One more question, maybe?
Do you think the reduction in semester rollback can be due to the indirect selection of goods? Or
I think the reduction is not explainable per se. I mean, because I worked with plant technology down as he lived for. That's what he worked on. And he couldn't explain it. I can tell you this. It does kind of coincide with, we had a really bad drought back then at that time period, so that, I mean, even the corners of the field didn't have much growing. I mean, it was just ground everywhere. So there wasn't a lot of hope for them to winter overall. But I think it's a combination of things, because we had resistant types, so did Georgia, so all of a sudden, all the varieties down there were resistant. Plus, we had the drought, which probably killed off a lot of drip, but I can't say for certain. I mean, I talked to the guys in Florida, they've seen a decrease in it for the last several years, and all of a sudden last year it started to come back up a little bit. So, I'm still concerned, and I tell our growers all the time, just because we're not seeing it, doesn't mean it can't blow up next year. And that's what worries me most about green for it. We can screen for it, but we actually don't have markers for that. And so I can't screen for it without having a deep level.
Let's take our speaker, Michael Baring.